God's designed us, right, with bodies to live with other real bodies in real places and to form relationships with those real people, right? And when we cut ourselves off from those things with these maybe cheaper pleasures or easier things, right? It's the sort of dying the death of 1,000 qualifications. I know that's not really the right metaphor for what I'm trying to get at, but like you're slowly killing yourself, if you would, if I could say it that way, right? Again, it's not the one act, it's the accumulation of all these things that all of a sudden you realize we're losing out on some aspect of our human design and what it means to flourish as a human being.
You are listening to the Gird Up Podcast, an unapologetically Lutheran voice for the ordinary Christian. My name is Charlie Ungemach, and today we're interviewing Joshua Pauling about life here in the digital age. But before we do that, I want to get you involved with the work we're doing here at Gird Up. So if you want to be part of our mission, you're in the right place. Make sure you hit follow or subscribe or like it or whatever it is that you do on the platform you're using to listen to this podcast. And after you do that, please consider making a donation. We call it a cup of coffee donation because for the price of a cup of coffee, you can help fund the work we're doing here at Gird Up as we flood the internet with confessional content and prepare the people of God for whatever lies ahead. Go to www.girdupministries.com, select buy us a cup of coffee in the menu, and make your donation there. If you want to stay connected, sign up for the Gird Up Dispatch. It's a weekly email with updates, resources, and encouragement to help you stand firm in Christ. You'll find the sign-up link on the website. And finally, if you've got questions or topics you want us to address or guests that you want to hear me interview, please send those suggestions my way via the link on the website. And finally, we're looking for sponsors. If you want to sponsor a couple episodes of this show, we'd be glad to have you. You are listening to the Gird Up Podcast, an unapologetically Lutheran voice for the ordinary Christian. My name is Charlie Ungemach, and our guest today is Joshua Pauling. He's here to talk to us about life in the digital age. But before we get to that, I want to encourage you to get involved with the work we are doing here at Gird Up. If you want to be part of our mission, you're in the right place. Hit follow or subscribe or like it, leave a rating, review, whatever it is on the platform you choose to listen. And make sure you share this episode with someone who needs a community just like this one. If you'd like to support the work we do here at Gird Up, please consider making a donation. We call it a cup of coffee donation because for the price of a cup of coffee, just $5, you can help support the work we do here as we flood the internet with confessional content and prepare the people of God for whatever lies ahead. Go to www.girdupministries.com, select buy us a cup of coffee, and make your donations there. If you want to sign up for the Gird Up Dispatch, our weekly email with updates, resources, and encouragement to help you stand firm in Christ, you'll find that sign-up link on the website as well. And finally, if you've got questions or topics you want us to address or guests you want to hear me interview, send those suggestions my way via the link on the website. The website is down in the show notes. You can also sponsor this show if you'd like to do that, sponsor a couple episodes or a series. I would be glad to have you. If you want more information about that, reach out on the website as well. Our guest today is Joshua Pauling. Josh is a husband, father, and an LCMS vicar at All Saints Lutheran Church in Charlotte, North Carolina. He wears a lot of hats. He's a headmaster at a classical academy, a frequent writer for publications such as Modern Reformation. He's the co-author of the book, Are We All Cyborgs Now? And will soon be releasing another book called Education's End. When he's not studying for the ministry or leading a school, he's also a traditional furniture maker and a restorer of vintage machinery. He's a man who deeply understands the difference between the weightless digital world that we're all addicted to and the heavy, glorious reality of God's physical creation. So, Josh, we're stoked to have you on Gird Up. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. Really looking forward to the conversation.
I think we got to start with the furniture maker and vintage machinery restorer. I am fascinated by that. My grandfather's a John Deere dealer.
Okay.
And as kids, one of the fun things we would do, and it was fun, was restore little John Deere lawn tractors, little 110s and things like that.
Yeah.
So I just want to hear about what kind of projects you have going on the side.
Sure. Yeah. So similar to you, part of this was my grandfather. He built his own house, designed it, a lot of it, and did some really neat architectural features in the house. And that, as he got older, and I learned more about that, that really intrigued me. And when he died, I got a lot of his tools, and that really started the woodworking journey for me. Um, and so I've made lots of things through the years. It started as a little hobby, right, with mostly with hand tools. And as I got better, people would give me their old tools that their grandfather had and things like that. And then other people started to ask me to make stuff, and so I sort of got better at it, and also started to get more and more interested in vintage tools and machinery. A lot of modern tools are made of plastic, right? They're imports from China and other places, and the quality is less than desired in many cases. But what I found is that old tools were well designed and very easy to repair. And so I was on a tight budget. I was a public school teacher, and we were a one-income family. We had two little kids. And if I wanted to make furniture, I was going to have to find some dirt cheap tools. And so I'd go to auctions, yard sales, estate sales, and find basically rusty old vintage tools and machines and then restore them. And that's how I outfitted my shop, pennies on the dollar. And then as I got better at that, I realized, man, there's sort of a market for this. And so I started flipping old vintage tools and machines, table saws, planers, joiners, things like that. And so I've probably at this point restored maybe 50 vintage machines. And by machines, I don't mean like big, Caterpillar machines. I mean, planers, joiners, table saws that would be of sort of an industrial size, things you'd see in your shop class at high school, right? Things that weigh 300, 400, 500 pounds, things that aren't going to break. They're bomb proof, right? And they're really easy to repair. Even for me, a teacher who had no, real training in mechanical things. And so that was really fun. And it's been a great way to balance all the intellectual work I do, right, which is very abstract in many cases. Woodworking is the exact opposite, very concrete, right? It forces you to encounter real things and to bump up against the limits of reality. But yeah, so it's been a hobby. It's also been a side income for me. When I resigned from teaching in 2021, it really became almost a main income source for me. So I've run it as a business as well. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what you just said, I think, is awesome and well said, right? It helps you. I think you said bump up against the limits of physical reality is the way you said that. Can you put that in layman's terms? Like, what is it that is the draw for you? You mentioned you really didn't even have any training to do this.
Right.
Just in the simplest terms, what is it that drew you into it, and why have you kept doing it, even though you've got 100 other things going on?
Yeah, great question. So I think the reason I do it is the same reason that people love to make all sorts of things, right? We are deeply meant to be creating beings, right? As Tolkien calls us, sub-creators, right? We're made in God's image. And obviously he creates in a way that we don't, right? But we mirror his creation in the things that we design and build and create. And we all love to do that, right? Whether it's the kid who builds with blocks when they're, a little child, whether it's the grandma who knits in the rocker by the fireplace, right? Whether it's children who paint pictures, we all have this innate desire to make. And that manifests differently in different people, to be sure. But we all have to find outlets for that. And for me, one of those has been woodworking for sure. As far as the way it bumps up against the limits of reality, maybe another way to put that is that you have to submit to the material, right? And the rules of the game, right? So in this way, it's just like any other sport or activity that we participate in and that we have to submit to, right? So when I woodwork, I can't just create in any way I want, right? I have to go with the grain, as we say. I have to pay attention to the material. I have to pay attention to my blades to make sure they're sharp. And if I go beyond the limits and the rules of the game, then my furniture won't stand, right? It'll fall apart. The joints won't stay glued. You could go on with the ways to describe it, right? And so too with any creating activity. Music's another great example, right? The true musician doesn't reject boundaries and limits and say, I'm free to do whatever I want. No, the true musician submits to the rules of the game, right? They learn the scales. They learn the time signatures. They practice and drill and drill and drill until they're truly free to play music well, right? Same thing with sports, right? The athlete doesn't shirk the limits of the sport. Um, they embrace those limits and rules and drill until then they can be truly free to play well. And I think that analogy just works for all aspects of life. We're told in our society to be self-creators, right? That we're completely autonomous, that we're free to do anything we want. But instead, what we need to do is embrace the limits of being a creature, right? And actually what we find is that that's true freedom, to live as we were designed within the limits our Creator has given us.
Okay. So if you've convinced me to be a maker, how do I go about figuring out what my lane is going to be? Like what my thing is?
I think that's where your interests lie, right? And in some ways, you're creating right now, right? You found a lane. It may not be as concrete of a thing you're creating, but you're using that innate desire to make meaningful content for people, right? You've designed this interview, right? You've set it all up, and you've created a whole podcast that's being a wonderful service to people. So that's one way, right? I'm sure you could go through your other interests and find others, right? But I do think that, what you're doing here, right, is somewhat abstract and hard to measure, right? Although there's all sorts of metrics and analytics, as we could talk about. But it's not the same as like a physical object, right? And I think that's where we do need some balance, right? We do need to experience, as I said, the limits of reality in some way. Maybe that's exercise, maybe that's gardening, maybe it's cooking, right? Baking. We go on and on with the ways that could manifest, but I think every person should have some way that they are in their bodies, right, making and creating in some way.
Yeah, it's almost a little absurd that we would have to have such a conversation, isn't it? Like, how do we get to the point where we have to be intentional? It's similar to the conversation about the gym, right?
Yeah.
Like, what is the gym? It's a place where we go pretend that we're doing manual labor, like in its simplest form, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Is that not what it is?
Yeah.
And doing it in a very safe environment.
Mm-hmm.
It's inescapable, and it's a good thing that we should be doing. And at the same time, it is kind of absurd, right?
Yeah.
You and I were talking before we hit record here. I think I told you I've been awake for maybe 8 hours, 10 hours today.
Yeah.
And if I've been awake for 10 hours, I've probably spent 8 in front of a screen in some way, shape, or form, and
Yeah.
even in front of screens with other people in meetings and things like that. But it's just such an integrated part of life at this point. Your book title is "Are We All Cyborgs Now?" I think that's pretty on the nose as far as what you think on the subject. But I'm curious, how would you describe the I don't know, the situation that we find ourselves in now? There's obviously all kinds of good things. There's all kinds of challenges. I think most of us are aware to some degree
Sure.
what those challenges are. So maybe my question is, give us a state of humanity or of the Western world at the moment when it comes to the digital world.
Yeah, great setup. Thank you. So first off, the title of the book, "Are We All Cyborgs Now?" As you said, really is getting at something important. Robin Phillips and I, my co-author for that book, an Eastern Orthodox friend of mine, we really wanted to help people realize that that we're more subtly influenced by the digital world than we realize, right? Nobody's walking around like a Terminator yet, right? We don't have, chips implanted in our brains yet. We don't have, mechanical arms yet. Maybe we never will, right? But I'm just throwing that out there to be a little rhetorical. But in some ways, we already all
has
cyborgs.
anything to say about it.
That's right. Yep. But in many ways, we already are cyborgs. We live in a digitally mediated world, right? And by that I mean the digital environment is like an ecosystem. It's like a habitat in which you live, right? It's not like prior technologies and tools. And I think this is where we really need to up our game when we think about technology. I don't know how many times in presentations or in responses to things I've written or spoke on, people will say, well, isn't technology just neutral, right? Isn't it just a matter of how you use it, right? That's a very common way of thinking when it comes to technology. But I think, honestly, it's a very naive way of thinking about technology because even with simple technologies, we know that's not true. We have a saying about hammers, right? When you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? What are we saying with that saying? Well, we're saying that a hammer sort of nudges you towards hammering. It's not neutral, right? And if we say that about hammers, how much more is that true with complex design technologies, right, that are purposefully designed to hack our attention, right? This is called persuasive design. This is all over Silicon Valley, right? They know what they're doing. They're attention hacking machines, right? Dopamine dispensers. We go on and on with the terms we want to call them. So we need to get past the technology to neutral mindset. That's just not true for any device. Think of other simple technologies. If you're left-handed, you experience this all the time, right? Lots of technologies nudge you to using your right hand. Scissors are a great example of this, right? Lots of tools are designed for using the right hand, right? So as a left-handed person, you're experiencing the nudge of technologies. Again, if that's true for simple technologies, how much more for these highly complex technologies that aren't just one-use tools? That's another big difference that we need to recognize, right? These are omni-tools, I call them. They can do everything. And because of that, it's just so much more seamless, right? It seems so flawless and frictionless. There's no resistance, right? And as a result, we just sort of default to them, right? And it becomes easier for us, right? We can get rid of much of the friction and resistance of everyday life through the screen, right? So that, I think, is the first thing. When we think about the digital world we live in, we need to think more intentionally about technology itself and realize that it's not neutral, that it's nudging us, right? It's always nudging us towards something. And it's always creating trade-offs, right? This is another big concept in the book that we develop. Technology always is a series of trade-offs. And if you don't acknowledge that, if you don't recognize that, then you're at a disadvantage to use them well, right? So then from there, when we think about technology not being neutral, technology being a series of trade-offs, then we can more faithfully think about specific technologies, how I want to use them, how I don't, right? How much time I want to spend on them and so forth. So that'd be the starting point, I think.
Yeah. There are so many, like there isn't any way to not be on technology at this point, right? Whether you go to a restaurant and they give you a QR code in order to see the menu, the growing number of places where it's, if there even is a drive-up window, like you got to DoorDash your food, all that kind of stuff, right?
Yep.
So this is like a multi-layer question, so I apologize for that ahead of time. But there doesn't seem to be a lot of immediate risk that even really is worth considering that the grid's going to go down. Like maybe there is an apocalyptic version of the future world where that happens. But as far as an immediate need, it doesn't really seem to be a threat. And it makes my life so much easier. And even beyond that, life is a lot. Like, not only does it make my life easier, but it actually makes my life harder than neutral in order to not use these things. Right? If I brick up my phone or get one of these other apps that limits my phone use, and now I don't have access to maps, I can't listen to the radio because there's nothing on the radio. I had to use my phone, all that stuff. I guess convince me maybe why it would be a bad idea to keep utilizing just every technology available to me.
Sure. Because the combination and sort of the addition of all of those experiences accumulate into something significant, right? So I'm not saying that, using the QR code once or taking a selfie once or any of those things are in and of themselves a bad practice, right? It's more the accumulation of all those things that are nudging us in, I think, unhealthy directions, right? And the way that they're nudging us, I think, we could flesh out throughout this conversation, but two of the biggest things I think the digital ecosystem nudges us towards are disembodiment and autonomy, right? By its very nature, digital technologies are disembodying, right? They're separate from your body, right? This conversation we're having, great example. I can see a pixelated image of you, right, on a screen, but it's not really you. It's flat, right? Same likewise you to me, right? So it's by its very nature separating my voice and my ideas from my actual embodied person, right? That's just a reality of digital technologies. And recognizing that, I think, again, is the first step. They also are nudging us towards autonomy. And by that, I mean, we have really a false sense of control in the digital world, right? Even in this conversation, like right now on the screen, I see all these volume tabs and things I can control, right? I can lower the volume, I can mute this, I can mute that. If the conversation went bad all of a sudden, I really wanted to be a jerk, I could just click out of it, right? I could end the conversation. I have all these levels of control in the digital world that I don't in reality, right? And again, as that accumulates, right, it's nudging us towards, maybe an unhealthy perception of ourselves, right? Especially if we think about, again, our status as creatures of God. We're not autonomous beings, right? We are not our own, Paul says. We're bought with a price, right? When we think about the scriptural view of the human person, when it comes to not being autonomous, and also the scriptural view of the person when it comes to embodiment, right? And the centrality of the human body and what it means to be human. And then obviously the incarnation itself, when God himself takes on flesh. So those would be some things, I think to sort of respond to you. It's again, it's not the one-time thing. It's more the accumulation of all of them that are nudging us in directions that I think are pretty inhuman, right? And so individuals will have to make choices and decisions as to what they're comfortable with and what they're not, right? And that's going to look different for different people. But I think the main thing is to craft really a personal philosophy of technology, to develop an intentional relationship to technologies. That's the starting point. Cal Newport talks about this a lot in Digital Minimalism and several of his other books about these topics. And I think it's very helpful, right? That's the starting point. To take the step back and craft a philosophy of technology. What do I want my relationship to these devices to be? And then from there, we can make some better decisions. So that's, I think, a bit of a response. I don't know if there were multiple parts to your question there. I don't know if you want to flesh that out a little bit more or what you'd like to do there, but.
No, I love where you took that, and I want to keep going in that direction. I was listening to a comedy podcast of all things in the last couple of days where they were talking about the difference between like city folks and country folks, right? And it was obviously caricatures of either.
Sure.
But the idea that like people in the city tend to look at people out in the country and be kind of arrogant about it. Be like, you bunch of hillbillies, you don't have any information, you don't have any knowledge, you don't have the same level of schooling, so forth.
Yeah.
And then the country folks are looking at the people in the city and going like, you don't even know how to stay alive. Like, what are you, what are you doing? Yeah. Right. But then I was thinking to myself, if you took, the toughest hillbilly and put him in a dark alley in New York City, he's not going to know what threats are and are not real. He's not going to know, how to get where he's going. Like he has absolutely frankly, no ability to survive in that environment. At least not any better than if you took a city person, it's starting to sound like the country mouse and the city mouse here.
That's what I was going to say, town mouse, country mouse. This is an old theme right here. Yeah, I love it.
Yep. You take the guy out of the city and you put him in, a country bar full of cowboys, or you put him in the middle of a field somewhere. Like, they equally have this pumped up sense of identity based on their environment. Which is not entirely grounded in reality. And I couldn't help but think of that a little bit as you're talking about this like loss of capacity that we have. And I know a lot of your work has dealt with identity. Yeah. Can you speak a little bit to the distortion of identity that takes place when too much of ourselves ends up wrapped up in things that are online?
Yeah, great question. I like the way you put that. Too much of ourselves get to be wrapped up online, and I do think it's sort of a matter of proportion, right? And I think we're way out of proportion in general right now when it comes to where the balance of our formation is taking place and the balance of identity formation. So if too much of that is taking place online, when we think of identity, there's lots of things. First off, the autonomy thing is just huge. And I think that's a good place to start, because that really bumps up against the original temptation in the garden, right? That ye shall be as gods, right? That you will be your own God. We want to be our own creators, and the digital environment acts like an accelerant on a fire, right? It just like explodes as a fire. It doesn't cause, right, in a deterministic way, but it certainly accelerates our human propensities for wanting to be autonomous and wanting to be like God, right? So that's a first part of it, I think. The second part of it, we really are creating a curated and performative identity online, right? We can craft and curate the identity through pictures, through images, through videos, through how we post things, right? What we post and choose not to post. I remain completely in control of that. And I can craft that identity in a very fine-grained way, right? I can sort of tune it in on different platforms the way I want, right? If I want to portray myself a certain way on this platform, I can do so, right? But I could also create another profile, right, and sort of tune it in a different way. So it's what some scholars have called a fine-tuned identity online, or fine-grained, right? And then you can also do that with your community online, right? So not only are you crafting your sense of self, sort of tuning it in or in a very granular way, you're also doing that with the community you're a part of, right? You can choose who you follow and who you don't, right? And as you do that more and more, you really sort of, as we know, algorithms continually sort of push you in those directions. And so we end up with self-chosen identity, self-chosen community, right? And all of those are then, again, changing how I'm thinking about myself, right? That I'm in control, that I can curate and craft my identity the way that I choose. And I can also choose my community in a way that just doesn't line up with reality, right? And the way that we have been given an identity and also placed in community, right? If you think about sort of our primal and foundational identities, most of them are given, right? You're born into a family that's given to you, right? You don't choose your family, right? You're born into a place. You don't choose the place, right? As you're growing up, right? Same thing with a church, right? A church is a community that you're a part of, and you hopefully aren't sort of crafting and curating the people you're interacting and not interacting with, right? Same thing with a workplace. Ideally, that's a place where you are being brought into contact with people that you might not necessarily choose to be your friends. And that's healthy, right? To have to interact with people that aren't of your own choosing, or aren't the people that align with you in every way that they might online in these niche communities that really are they're like a pseudo community, right? Eddie LaRoe, great writer on these topics, recently wrote an article for First Things about parasocial relationships among Gen Z. And I think that's another good way to think about this, that online, you're really developing parasocial relationships. And what he means by that is, like, for example, I could follow you, Charlie, right? And all the things that you're doing and posting without really ever having a relationship with you, right? I could like your videos and I could, see all your comments and share them with others, right? But at the end of the day, if I walked by you on the street, you wouldn't know me and I wouldn't know you, right? If I were just a generic follower, you see what I'm saying? And that's just happening. It's distorting what we think a relationship is, honestly. So there's all sorts of aspects of this, but I think those would be some of the big ones, that the element of control, the element of curation and performance, also that fine-grained and fine-tuned aspect of it, and then also like the parasocial aspect of it. It's not a real relationship. It's a pseudo-relationship. And it gives you a sense, right? It gives you like a temporary high, dopamine, etc. But then it falls, right? It doesn't have the permanence and lasting meaning of real relationship. So it's like the worst of both worlds, right? And it just keeps causing you to seek for more and more of a hit. And this is where I think some of the work of recent researchers, cognitive scientists, neuroscientists, and so forth, is really helpful in helping us realize that the digital environment, in many cases, is really more like heroin or meth than like candy, right? For a long time, people have compared the digital environment to candy, right? That it's maybe not healthy for you, but everybody has a little candy, right? But some of the research, as we learn more about what it's doing at the level of the brain, right, and the level of our dopamine and all sorts of things, that it's actually more like hard drugs. And that, I think, also should impact us in how we craft an intentional relationship with these things.
Yeah, you're making me feel not guilty, but you're convicting me here. Again, I told you earlier, last night somebody ran into a light pole or an electric pole just
Yeah.
outside of the apartment complex that I'm living in,
Mhm.
knocked out the power. So I
Yeah.
was trying to work on, podcast stuff, knocked out the power, and then also knocked out the internet for several hours.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking to myself, I don't like how uncomfortable I am right now,
Yeah.
knowing that I'm going to spend the next couple of hours, having quiet time, essentially, right?
Yeah.
And I love to read. I read voraciously,
Yeah.
but even that, even just in that scenario, I'm sitting in my
Yeah.
chair trying to read a book that I very much am enjoying. Happen to be reading Atlas Shrugged. It's excellent.
Okay.
Totally
Yeah.
worth the read. But sitting down reading it, I'm going to read it for a couple hours anyway. And just the knowledge that I can't be on, I couldn't pick up my phone and well, I probably could have because of the cell phone, but like I can't get on my computer and check my email if I want. Just that not being available to me was enough to disallow me to focus. Right. It really, I guess I'll give you the chance to react to that maybe first if you have anything to say to that.
Yeah, no, that's very common, right? That creates a level of anxiety when we're separated from those devices or from access because we become so trained and habituated into having that access, right? In some ways, it's like the beginnings of withdrawal, you might say, right? But as we know about addiction research and recovery, part of that is pushing through those things, right? And then again, retraining our brain and sort of rewiring those things to then move beyond those feelings of anxiety to actually then sort of push through to the other side and develop new habits and new patterns of thinking and living. So that's a very common experience. And part of it is because when we have the device, we are training ourselves to always be in what's called a continuous state of partial attention, right? And what we mean by that is that there's like this just low-level brain drain just because there's a possibility of an interruption, right? A ding, a notification, an email, right? It's called interruption readiness, right? In the research. Fascinating, right? That just having the potential of being interrupted actually is draining brain resources from what we should be attending to, right? And we all deal with that, right? We frequently have multiple windows open on our computer, right? All these things that are just, continually putting us in that state of partial attention and interruption readiness. Another related part of this is that multitasking is a myth. When we're talking about two attentional tasks, you cannot do two attentional tasks at the same time, right? Now, obviously, you can walk and chew gum at the same time and obviously things like that, right? But you cannot do two attentional tasks at the same time. All the brain research makes this clear. What you're doing is you're switching. You're doing an act of switch tasking, if you will. And each time you switch, there's a mental cost that you're paying. And that there's a brain lag that continues as you make the switch. And the research, as far as the number of seconds that is, there's a range of seconds that is. We explore this in the book. So there's a brain lag when you make the switch, right? And then when you make the switch back, then you've got the brain lag from the other one, right? And then you've got to refocus on the thing that you were doing. So it's not more efficient, right? It's actually much more efficient to focus on one thing at a time and do that well, right? And then move on to another thing. Whereas our devices are designed to make us think we can multitask, right? You can have all the windows open, right? You can have all your notifications on, right? So some of the things that you can do with that is you can try to turn your device back into a one-use tool at a time, right? That's a simple, intentional thing you can do, right? When you're writing in Microsoft Word, just be writing in Microsoft Word, right? When you're doing your email, just do your email and do it well, right? And then be done with it. On and on we could go, right? With trying to return the Omni tool into a one-use tool lane. That's just a simple technique that you can do. Now, we all struggle with this. I struggle with this too, right? It's so easy to open all the windows and try to do everything. But then at the end of the day, you realize that maybe it wasn't more efficient and you're drained in a way that you might not be if you had that more focus on specific tasks at a time. Cal Newport, another great book he has on this is Deep Work, where he talks about lots of strategies for this, and also A World Without Email, where he argues that email actually isn't more efficient because it basically just extends the conversation over a longer period of time that could have happened either on phone or in person in a much more efficient way. But that'd be a separate discussion.
Yeah, no, that's a fascinating can of worms to open as well. You kind of hinted at this idea that there's almost like a little faucet running in the back of my head, just draining all of my mental energy out throughout the day. There's been a lot of commentary on the idea that these 15-second clips also are detrimental to my brain power. Can you talk a little bit to the detriment of those kinds of technology or technical experiences specifically? So like social media in particular,
Sure.
even like commercials and things like that in particular.
Yes, right. So these short clips, shorts on YouTube, TikTok, all those types of things. These are even more extreme forms of social media, which are really sort of the tip of the iceberg when we're talking about, well, not the tip of the iceberg, the tip of the spear, when it comes to how our attention is being formed and shaped by the digital ecosystem. So those sort of short form clips and such, we could maybe say they're sort of like the worst of the worst, because the whole thing is sort of lower passions, instincts, right? Constantly looking for the next one, right? And the way the platforms are designed, they're tracking any slight pause you have on any of them, right? And then feeding you more like that. So it's all algorithmically manipulated to really hit you in the lower passions, right? And that, I think, is something we all need to be aware of. There was a interview with a Silicon Valley executive recently I heard where he said something like this. He said, I monetize the 7 deadly sins. I monetize the 7 deadly sins. I thought that was quite a statement when it comes to the incentives, if you will, of Silicon Valley. Obviously, that's a generalization I'm making. Maybe it's an unfair one, but I think we all see tendencies, at least in that direction. They don't have our best interests in mind in many cases, right? We've seen cases come out against Meta and Instagram and so forth, where they knew that what they were designing was not healthy for young people especially, but they continue to do so, driven by other factors. So I think that's part of it. When it comes to how that's impacting our attention, there's just huge impacts. It becomes more and more difficult to focus, right? As I've already said, it's this state of continuous partial attention. That's a big part of it. And there's actually some emerging research, and I don't know quite what I think about it completely, but that's arguing that this digital environment we live in, the more children and young people especially tend to spend time in it, it in many cases can even simulate the symptoms of like ADHD, right? Or maybe even autism, right? Again, not that I'm not saying it's the same thing, and the researchers aren't either, but it's almost like an induced form of it technologically, right? It's sort of replicating similar conditions might be a safer way to say it, right? Again, I don't want to overstate the research or claim something that they're not claiming, but I do think that's interesting to think about, that our technological exposure can in some ways mimic, conditions that have also medical realities to them. So I'll stop there and see what you want to say.
Yeah. So I can imagine somebody coming back just with the simple response, I don't really mind that much that my attention span is small. For whatever reason, that doesn't really seem to be having that big of an impact on my life, or not to a degree that I care about it. I keep my feed pretty clean, so I'm not necessarily diving into the 7 deadly sins.
Mm-hmm.
Why does it still matter? What am I losing out on maybe if I just kind of give myself over to these kinds of technologies and this kind of a life?
I think the way you framed it is the starting point. You're losing out on richer experiences. You're losing out on better things that we are training ourselves to not like. So when we talk about things like this, it's very easy for, as your question is implying, for it to come across as like, no, 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 just don't do this. Like kids these days, right? Get off my lawn, all those things, right? But it's actually not that at all, right? It's that there's better things that we could be doing, right? There's richer human experiences that are embodied, that are actually connecting us to true, good, and beautiful things that are much better than the 15-second clips, even if they're clean, right? Again, the point isn't that there's just bad content online. It's actually that there's something about the form, right, of the medium that is deforming us, right? And to push back against that, we need to have two routes. One is we do need to say no to certain things, right? But it has to be much more than that. Otherwise, again, you just get stuck in the kids these days mindset, right? There actually has to be a better yes, right? A series of things that we're replacing digital experiences with that then begin to awaken in us a sense of something more, right? That there's actually something wonderful and beautiful and rich about silence, about boredom, about going outside and touching grass, about the friction of sitting across from somebody and having to think of something to say, right? About embodied experiences, on and on we could go. That those embodied realities are actually bringing you into contact to who you are and who God created you to be. God's designed us, right, with bodies to live with other real bodies in real places and to form relationships with those real people, right? And when we cut ourselves off from those things with these maybe cheaper pleasures or easier things, right? It's the sort of dying the death of 1,000 qualifications. I know that's not really the right metaphor for what I'm trying to get at, but like you're slowly killing yourself, if I could say it that way, right? Again, it's not the one act; it's the accumulation of all these things that all of a sudden you realize we're losing out on some aspect of our human design and what it means to flourish as a human being.
Yeah, I'm sure I'm not the first one to think of it this way, but as you're talking, I could not help but think of the Matrix, and
Yep.
I know that's almost become a cliche,
Sure.
but I think that's because it's so on the nose. The difference being that in the Matrix, they're forced into these little incubation chambers where they only live in a digital world.
Yeah.
We're willingly lowering ourselves into the bathtub
Right.
and kind of playing with this world where we kind of get to live online instead of in real life. And we're toying with those things that when we see it in that kind of a black and white, we go, oh, well, that's bad. We don't want that. The
Sure.
world's, if that happens, the world's going to garbage, right? But then when it's actually real time and I have the opportunity to say yes or no to something like this, I just kind of lower myself into the water and just get a little
Sure.
feel for it, but don't
Yeah.
commit all the way. And very few of us do commit all the way, although there are plenty of people who live their lives basically online.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, the Matrix analogy is very good. And actually, my co-author Robin Phillips, we were on a podcast together, and we were talking about this, and he said it's actually worse than the Matrix because in the Matrix, at least they were all in it together, whereas we've in many ways we have sort of each our individual Matrix, right? Because of the way it's all curated and we're fed into like echo chambers and stuff. So that was an interesting thing he brought up there. Yeah, I think another thing I'd say here is that part of the reason it's so alluring is that it's easier, right? There's less friction to it. Real life is hard, right? There's challenges, there's tragedy, there's suffering, there's friction in interacting with people in real time and real space, right? Like, what are you going to think to say when there's silence, right? What if I've got bad breath today, right? What if, am I supposed to shake their hand or give them a hug? I mean, we go on and on with the awkwardness, right, of interaction with human beings in real time and space. But there's something about that friction that actually is formative for us, right? We need resistance, we need friction, we need challenge to grow as people and to develop virtue, right? So I think that's an important aspect of this. And another part of it is that, I think we need to recognize and admit this is not just a willpower question. These things are designed by experts in human psychology, right? We've got a whole army of people that are trying to get us addicted to these things. It's much more than a willpower thing. In other words, it's not your fault that you struggle with this and that I struggle with this. They're designed to cause us to struggle with this. And so that means that, again, we need intentionality. We need to also separate ourselves from these things sometimes because the allure is just so strong, right? We all feel it. If the phone's in your pocket, you're going to get it out, right? So maybe sometimes it shouldn't be in your pocket, right? Maybe it shouldn't be at the dinner table, right? Maybe it definitely shouldn't be in your bedroom, right? And I'm just going to say something like that. And some people say, oh, that's, you're being too legalistic or something like that. I would say, well, first off, legalism is when you're, tying your salvation to certain acts. And I'm not saying that at all. And secondly, it's just common sense. If we can't say that, what can we say? I wrote an article a while back for a publication, and in there I had a line about, we should draw some lines and boundaries in our homes. And one of them should be that phones don't go in our bedrooms. And the editor, this happens a lot when you try to write pretty straightforwardly on technology questions. But the editor totally softened that part, and it was like, maybe you could say it perhaps might be helpful if you considered not putting your phone in your bedroom, right? And it just sort of totally weakened the point, right? That we actually have to make decisions and do hard things if we want to protect the human things. So friction, resistance, challenge, we need those things in some form. Now, that doesn't mean we never use machines or technologies to help us. That's not what I'm saying. Of course we do. But there gets to be a point where everything becomes too easy and too tied up with technology that we actually need to intentionally encounter forms of resistance, challenge, and strain, right? And I would say we're in one of those moments, right? Everything is just so frictionless and so resistanceless that we actually need to encounter resistance and friction. And we need that because that's how human beings grow and develop, right? There's a great book by Nassim Taleb called, what's it called? The Black Swan or Anti-Fragility. I can't remember what the exact title is, but you probably know it, right? He argues that human beings are anti-fragile, right? We're not fragile. We're not resilient. We're actually anti-fragile. Fragile things break when you drop them, right? Resilient things bounce when you drop them. Anti-fragile things get stronger when you drop them, right? And generally speaking, humans are anti-fragile, right? We get strong by actually working out, using our bodies, encountering resistance and friction, right? We actually get stronger and smarter by pushing ourselves intellectually, right? On and on we could go with the way that works. And what's happening with these technologies, if we want to just maybe mention some of the intellectual things, right? We're offloading our cognitive effort to technologies, AI, LLMs, ChatGPT, right? I was a teacher, so this is like my lane. I'm very much concerned about the impacts of, I know you were a teacher as well, impacts of AI in the classroom, right? And what's happening is students are offloading the cognitive effort to AI, right? And they're actually not growing intellectually because of that, right? They're not encountering the friction, the resistance, and challenge that we need to. And that could be sort of generalized across the board when it comes to digital technologies. It's tending towards removing friction and resistance and challenge. And as human beings, we need those things to grow and flourish. Again, that's not to say we never use machines or technologies to make things easier for us. Of course we do. But if we never encounter resistance, friction, and strain in the human things, right, when it comes to intellectual virtue, when it comes to moral virtue, spiritual virtue, when it comes to human capacities, then we are not going to develop those capacities. They just atrophy, just like your muscles, right? If you never use your muscles, well, then they atrophy. That's why you got to use them.
Yeah. And that kind of circles back to where we started this conversation, right? You started by talking about control. I don't remember where I pulled the quote from, but one of the quotes I wanted to talk about that you wrote was, working with wood or metal forces you to submit to the nature of the material. The digital world, however, promises us total control. One leads to humility and the other to hubris. I'd like you to talk a little bit about that dynamic. Why does so the way you've said this, it makes it sound like the digital world inevitably leads us to hubris, whereas the physical world inevitably leads us to humility. Can you defend that and explain it?
Yeah, no, that's good. Good pushback. I'd probably avoid the language of inevitable or something that's deterministic. I don't believe technology is deterministic. I believe it's more of a nudge. But that those nudges are strong, and that we need to work to resist them. So when we think about the digital world, it's maybe it'd just be safer to say it's nudging us towards hubris, right? Towards autonomy, towards control. Towards choice would be another way to put it as well. Think of all the things you're constantly choosing in the digital environment, right? And that's a very new experience, historically speaking. The amount of choice that we have every day, right? Like, how many potential things can you watch? How many potential things can you buy, right? On and on we could go. It's just choice, 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 choice. For most of human history, you didn't have those amount of choices. You didn't even have a choice on your profession or career for a large portion of history, right? You certainly didn't have a choice to move like halfway around the world or around the country either. So we're constantly being nudged towards choice, towards control, towards autonomy. Whereas in the physical world, there are more limits that you're encountering, right? You have the limits of your own body. You can only be in one place at a time, right? You have the limits of the weather. Right? If it's cold, you got to put a jacket on. If it's hot, you got to, deal with the heat. On and on you could go. That's what I mean. That's what I'm getting at. I wouldn't want to push it too far. But if the balance of your formation is taking place online, then, we have to think about what that's doing to us.
So we've squarely entered the realm of identity now. What does an overindulgence in the digital world do to both the formation of my identity and what I'm trying to get at is the fact that we have a distorted sense of self when we build ourselves, when the foundation and the building blocks of our identity are all digital.
Mm-hmm.
And I would like to have a little conversation on that. This, for me, I think that's one of the most compelling detriments maybe of the digital world, is this unmoored sense of self that just is not rooted in reality, at least not the physical reality of the world that we live in. I'm trying to think of how to ask the question. What do you see as, why do you think, I don't know how to ask the question.
Yeah.
Do you know?
Well, maybe we
could
could just talk about what that leads to, right? In a lot of cases, we're seeing it all over, right? Anxiety rates, isolation, loneliness, lack of meaningful relationships, the difficulty with which Gen Z has in forming meaningful relationships, especially relationships with the opposite sex, right? Marriage rates declining and all those types of things. So we're seeing the effects of digital formation, right? When it comes to identity. And so that individual identity that's formed online, right, is having effects at the community level. And I think that's maybe the next place to go and think about, right? This isn't just about me and a screen. It's about human formation. And as communal creatures, that has implications for everybody. And that's, I think, what we're seeing, really a wake up to this reality in the last few years, right? Since maybe a good place to start would be the publication of The Anxious Generation a few years ago by Jonathan Haidt, right? That just took the country by storm because he was naming what everybody was seeing, right? And again, people for a long time, you were a teacher, I was a teacher, we had a hunch, right, that something wasn't right here. Parents, same thing, right? But he was naming it. and he had the data to go with it, right? In our society, well, data is pretty important, right? And we could say maybe it's too important, and it's maybe a little sad that it took a social scientist with a bunch of graphs and charts and data to prove this point, but so be it, right? So I think we're really seeing a turning of the tide since that book. More and more research is coming out of the effects of these things, both on the personal level and the communal level. And that's the starting point, right? You've got to recognize the issue. And then from there, we can go to resisting, right? 3 R's here. You got to recognize the problem. Then you can resist the worst aspects of these things, right? Craft your personal relationship to these things, and also in community. That's the next level. And then also then you got to reclaim. You got to reclaim better things. You've got to have real, live, embodied practices and habits that come to be more attractive than these, short hits on things that allure us, right? In many ways, they're like a hyper reality. They're brighter colors. They seem more attractive, but then they're not satisfying. Sort of like ultra processed food, right? You could make a lot of analogies there, right? The bag of Doritos tastes like really good, and you just want to keep eating it, right? But then at the end, you're not full, right? Because it's not real food. Same thing with the digital environment. It's like a hyper reality. It's like an ultra processed food.
Yeah.
So I think we go from the individual identity issue then to seeing it on the community level, its impacts. And then that also brings up the question of how do you form community, right, in such an age, and also the importance of collective action on these issues. And I think that's maybe an important thing for families to consider, for schools to consider, for churches to consider, right? If I choose in my family to not give my daughters a smartphone, and they don't have one, we can have some benefits within our family about that, right? But unless also a bunch of other people make the same choice, then we're not really getting the community level benefit from that. Haidt talks about this in The Anxious Generation. It's the collective action problem. And that's why he says schools are such a good starting point, because you can sort of create a community with the rules and boundaries around phones that then maybe flows out from there, right? And I would say the original community is family, right? So families should craft together practices and habits that they want to have in their home. The home should be a sanctuary, right, of real embodied experiences with one another. So that level of community, I think, is important too.
Yeah, I can see somebody pushing back though, and just saying like your daughters would have community if you gave them cell phones. They would then have the opportunity to build that kind of community online. What's the difference between online community and in-person community? And it sounds like you're saying it's better to have in-person community than online community. I think you're right. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. No, it's a good question. I think all we have to do there is look at all the data that many of the young people who are connected online and are spending a lot of time on social media with their friends are actually the ones that feel more lonely and isolated. It's not fulfilling the true need for community, because it's a performative and curated form of community. And in many cases also it's an alienating form, because you see your friend post something. Oh man, they look so perfect, and oh, they're getting all these likes on their post. Oh, I posted something, and oh, I don't look that good, and I didn't get as many likes. So it's very comparative, right? This is especially documented with young girls, with teenage girls, the effects of this. So that would be, I think, my response just on a data level, that the data doesn't bear out that argument, that the connection and community that is supposedly claimed for the online environment just doesn't pan out in reality. That would be the first point. And then I think the second point would be that I want my girls to have richer experiences and develop a set of capacities and skills that's going to allow them to flourish in whatever environment they're in, and develop relationships with people of all ages and things like that.
You've mentioned a couple of different times the anxiety that comes with digital communities and being online as much as we are. Where do you think that anxiety comes from?
That's a good question. Probably a variety of places. Part of it, I think, is that we're in that continuous, like, partial attention mode, which is sort of similar to a fight or flight mode, right? You're always sort of scanning and looking. My co-author, Robin, develops this in one of the chapters in the book, where he looks at, anxiety and that experience of anxiety and what actually is happening to the brain when we're in that digital mode, and how that is similar to, the fight or flight mode. That's sort of a primal thing. And, when you're constantly sort of in a low-level mode of making a decision, this is another way to think about it. The digital environment always causes you to make a decision, and that is anxiety-inducing, right? We're not meant to always be living in that state of decision, right? So that would be part of the reason that it creates anxiety. I think it also creates anxiety because of the comparative nature of it, right? That would be part of it. The way that it never turns off, right? This is another thing that growing up before smartphones, even if you were bullied at school, when you got home, that ended, right? But now it doesn't end. It goes on all night long, especially if the phone's in your room, right? Cyberbullying and things like that. So I think those would be some of the factors. I'm sure there's more.
Yeah. I can't help but let my mind go to identity too, right? You talked a little bit about the comparison, but
Yeah.
even if there isn't necessarily comparison, you still created this online persona. And whether you realize you've done so or not, you have created an online persona. And I think it's probably magnified for somebody like me that literally has created an online persona and brand, right? But you're just in performance mode all the time, even when, so then, and this is something I noticed in myself. I think that's why it struck me the way that it did. And you've written about this a little bit as well. But even then, when I'm not online, I'm constantly looking then for, like, what can I take a picture of? Where would this, where would this be a good place for me to film a video? How can I'm listening to something, I'm reading something and go, oh, how can this turn into content? There's just constant curation going on, a curation of my world that detaches me from actually being where my feet are. Can you speak to that a little?
Oh man, Charlie, that's right on the money. And that's great that you're realizing that, right, as a content creator. So in the book, Robin nails this one too. He says that we end up operationalizing everything to serve our online identity, right? Or instrumentalize everything. Like you said, your experiences of nature, your experiences outside, you're constantly thinking, how can I operationalize this to fulfill my identity, right? And I can relate to that too, as somebody who does a lot of writing, right? So when I read a book, sometimes I fall into that trap, like, oh, how can I operationalize this for a new article, right? Or something like that. And then in some ways, what is that doing to my actual engagement with the material, right? And as a woodworker, when I was running my woodworking business as my main source of income, I also was posting things online and everything for my business, and feeling that sense that you had as well, like turning everything to a performance, like, oh, what picture can I take in my shop of me doing this work, right? And what video can I make about me making this furniture, restoring this machine? And I did. I created a YouTube channel, and I had a Facebook and an Instagram and stuff. And I felt that as well, right? And that is that's just part of the game. And it's a burden. I do not know how like huge content creators do it. Like with huge followings, like getting all the comments and responses and feeling like you always have to be performing. It's just got to be exhausting. I mean, I had with my YouTube channel, I had like 3,000 subscribers, which is minuscule. But even the amount of comments and questions I would get on the videos, I eventually turned the comments off, and the like button, I turned them both off. Even though I know that hurts me algorithmically as far as YouTube, it was just exhausting. Even with such a small following and such a niche thing like woodworking, right? I was getting questions and comments. I was getting critiques of my videos. I was like, dude, I'm just a guy in my shop trying to help you out. Like, stop critiquing the lighting on my video, So, I can relate to what you're saying, and it's a real thing. And, I have to admit, I'm glad that like, I'm not doing that anymore. So yeah.
Well, and I've had a couple people tell me like how they think I should, and in a good way, like giving me probably very good advice as far as how can I grow the channel more, what kind of content should I be creating. I've even taken online courses and things about how to make viral content. And I personally have made a very intentional decision. Like if you watch my reels, and every once in a while I'll post pictures, like if I'm in a new city or something like that. and they're usually not very good because I don't really care that much. But I'm just trying to keep my ants updated on where I am, right? But all of the content that I do post is around a podcast clip for exactly that reason. Is I don't want, like, all I want, my focus is that you would then see a podcast clip and listen to the show. That's all I'm trying to do, right?
Yeah.
Or even if you don't listen to the show, that you'd get just a little bit of gospel or rethink something just a little bit.
Sure.
That's all I'm trying to do. It's not me, right?
Yeah.
And the reason I've chosen to be so intentional about that is that I got so burned out on being performative, right?
Yeah.
So all I want to do is bring more attention to something I've already created, which is a long form podcast like that. I'm just trying to bring more attention to some of the ideas and things that are being explored there.
Yeah.
But one, I think there's a lot of people that aren't being intentional about that. And two, like a little, maybe a little glimpse behind the curtain. This is somebody who does spend a lot of time online. I'm not constantly scrolling Instagram or curating life either. So with that in mind, if I can turn this then and face you a little bit, you're a school leader, you're a dad and a husband, so forth, who is very knowledgeable on these subjects. I'm curious what your life and household and even school life and things like that look like, as someone who intimately understands the temptations and challenges, but also blessings of the digital world. And then also, you have to live in reality, right? It can't just be theory. Like your daughters, I'm sure, do push back sometimes on restrictions and rules and things like that. Your parents and students do have questions about why things are being done the way that they are. So maybe if you're willing to pull back the curtain a little bit, let's start with school. To what degree do you guys use technology and things like that at school, or what would you maybe advise other, obviously every school's different, but what things should we be mindful of as we're making those kinds of decisions for our own schools and so forth?
Great question. First, I want to commend you, Charlie, for what you just explained to me, how you're intentionally using these technologies and not just playing the viral game. I think there's a huge temptation there, and kudos to you. I'll just encourage you to, continue to do that, and make sure you have boundaries, right, with your home life and things like that, because it can just bleed into everything. So some things related to school and education, and then we'll talk a little bit about the home. How about that? Okay, so when it comes to schools, this is another area where the research is just piling up. There's a new book out called Digital Delusions by Jared Horvath, and he basically looks at mountains of studies that have been done in the last 5, 10, 15 years, and more recent ones as well, that have looked into the effects of educational technologies in the classroom. And what is found is consistently that these things do not improve educational outcomes. Okay. Ed tech was added to schools because Google and other large companies pushed it. Imagine that. And I remember seeing this unfold in my school. You probably do too. First it was, smart boards. Well, before that it was computers. Then it was smart boards. And then it was iPads that you could have, brought into your classroom. And then it was Google Chromebooks for every student, right? One-to-one initiatives, things like that. And those things were just rolled out with very little thought on the actual educational question of, do these benefit students, right? The question was efficiency, ease, right? Interest, relevance, things like that, but nothing actually about educational outcomes. Well, now we have the receipts, right? We have enough time and data to see that these things are not improving educational outcomes. So that, I think, is a place to start. You need to realize that these things are not actually benefiting students when it comes to their actual intellectual growth. And, many teachers had a hunch about this, again, but now the receipts are coming in, which can help those who maybe are more convinced by numbers than like a hunch, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is that, when we think about the development of human capacities, especially in younger years for students, you want to make sure not to atrophy the development of those capacities, right? So, for example, let's use a classic one like math, mathematical calculations, right? The ability to calculate math in your head. So if we want a student to be able to do that, then they're going to have to practice their math facts, right? They're going to have to actually memorize them and say them and recite them and write them out and, use them in math problems. And you want that to happen so that they develop that capacity to be able to think quickly and then do higher levels of math, right? But if you were to introduce the calculator at an early age and they never actually develop those skills, right, then they're not going to be able to advance to higher levels of math well, right? You could do the same thing with a keyboard, right? Before you introduce the keyboard, you want to make sure that students develop the capacity to write, right? There's all sorts of research about the benefits of writing things by hand and all the brain stuff that's occurring there in ways that doesn't happen when you're typing, right? So we want to make sure, especially with younger grades, to allow those human capacities to develop in a very natural and embodied way when they're not being mediated by devices or technological tools. And so at our school, we're doing a hybrid academy approach. So it's 2 days a week on campus and the rest of the week is homeschooling. So this is really a partnership between school and parents, right? So our school is going to be an intentionally tech minimal school. And we do this not because technology is bad, but because we care about student learning. And there's something better, right? So our classrooms are going to be very tech minimal to create an environment of human interaction with each other, right? Full presence with each other and the development of human capacities. And we're going to encourage families in their homes to have boundaries when it comes to devices and such, and to really, for their children especially, to have all sorts of limits around devices. Again, not because devices are bad, but because we want formation, we want human formation to be directing us to true, good, and beautiful things, right? And if students are in our classes, being exposed to true, good, and beautiful things, but at home being fed, short videos and screens all the time, then that formation is going to clash with what we're going for in the classroom, right? So we need to have an alignment of, the formation that's taking place in the school and in the home. I've written articles about technology policies for schools in all sorts of places, and I don't know if we really want to get bogged down in like policies, but that's sort of the overarching orientation I would take is, what I described there. When it comes to the home, my goodness, I think the home is really the first place where this should really manifest itself, as we want to think about the home as a sanctuary, right? As a sacred place, if you will. And so in our home, we do all sorts of intentional things to try to craft that place. And I don't say this to brag or say that everybody has to do these exact same things. That's not the point here. The point is you got to do something, right? And every family's different, but maybe some of these ideas you'll say, oh, that's a neat idea. Oh, that's not a neat idea. And that's fine, right? Again, this isn't legalism. This isn't, trying to bind people's consciences or anything. This is just common sense wisdom in the digital age. Take it or leave it, right? So first off, in our home, we have clear boundaries on where devices go. Devices don't go in our bedrooms. When I get home, my phone goes in like a little shelf by the door. That's where we generally keep our phones. Now, if it rings, I'll go get it, right? And there's times where I'll take it from there to other places downstairs, but our bedrooms are upstairs, and I don't know the last time I brought my phone upstairs for something. And we definitely don't bring them up to our bedrooms at night. My girls are 16 and 14, and they have no smartphones. They don't have phones, and they've never asked for one. And they've never asked for one, maybe because they know the answer, or maybe because they have been trained to desire other things. Maybe it's probably a combination of both, right? And again, I'm not saying this is some like idealistic thing. Oh, my kids are so great or something like that. I'm just saying it's possible, right? It's possible to push back and create a different way for your family. You don't have to do whatever other family does, right? We're Christians, right? By default, we're weird, right? So just be weird and own it, right? So that's sort of where we're at with like boundaries. Phones don't go in the bedrooms. They sort of have a designated place downstairs. Yes, sometimes they move from that place, right? But generally that's where they are. When it comes to the internet at home, for a long time we didn't have the internet at all at home. My wife and I both had flip phones until like 5 or 6 years ago. I think it was around COVID, so that would have been about 6 years ago now. And we did get smartphones then, and so now when we want the internet, we can hotspot our phones. But even that's a little barrier, right? It's not like the internet is always on in my house. I have no wires coming into my house. I don't have television. I don't have like satellite or cable. I don't have an internet connection that way. So when I want to use the internet in my house, I need to turn on my computer. I need to hotspot my phone, and then I need to, connect my computer to the hotspot. Now you could say, oh, those are just little tiny micro barriers. But if we know about habit formation, little barriers to entry make a big difference. This is James Clear, Atomic Habits, right? If you want to minimize something, put barriers in front of it, right? If you want to maximize a behavior, remove the barriers, right? Common sense principle. So we've added just a couple little micro barriers to internet access in our home. And sometimes that prevents me from logging on, right? Because I know, I got to go over to my phone, I got to hit the hotspot, then I got to turn my computer on, then I got to connect the two. Again, you could say, oh, that's silly, but I think it prevents me from like listless use in some cases. We also, when it comes to the television, we do have a television, and we use it for watching movies, right? We watch movies together as a family sometimes. And we do have a good old-fashioned digital antenna, right? So I can pick up NBC or CBS or things like that. We like sports, right? So when the Olympics were on, we watched television for the Olympics, right? NCAA tournaments coming up, we're going to watch some of that, right? I think there's a place for those things, right? But my daughters have picked up on that there's clear boundaries there. We don't just have the TV on just because. We have it on for a specific purpose when we're doing something together as a family. And when we're not using it, we started this a couple years ago, and I'm maybe not the most consistent on it, but we actually put the TV behind the entertainment center when we're not using it. And that, again, is a little bit of a barrier. It's very unlikely for me to just turn the TV on just because I'd actually have to physically lift it up, put it on the stand, and then turn it on, right? So here, what we're doing is we're creating barriers to entry on things that we want to reduce our use of, and we're making we're lowering the barrier to things that we want to be drawn to, right? So what do we have in our downstairs area instead of like screens and devices everywhere? Well, we have a piano, we have a guitar, we have a bunch of books, we got books everywhere, we got board games, right? We have like embodied activities that we want us and our kids to do. And right now downstairs, actually, we also have a sewing machine and we have a loom. My daughter's got a little loom for Christmas, right? So what are all those things saying to me and my wife and my daughters? It's saying, let's do things together. Let's make things, right? Let's push ourselves intellectually. Let's read books. Let's play music. Let's play games. Let's make something with the sewing machine, right? So those are just some simple things you can think about with how you structure your home environment, right? That can help nudge you in the right direction. We could keep going there, but I'll stop there and see if you want to pick up on anything or ask questions or push back or.
No, I love it. And I thank you for it. One of the questions I was going to ask is, what if this just sounds extreme to somebody? Because it does, but you actually talked to a lot of those things. You're not living entirely outside of the world. You have a digital antenna. You do have smartphones. This stuff is accessible when you need it and or want it. But so it's not actually as extreme as it sounds. It's just intentional, which leads me where I want to go last here. This is striking often with guests that I get to talk to, and very much enjoyed this conversation. So thank you. But this is, I mentioned the same thing with Adam Kuntz and then Dr. John Bombaro, who
Yep.
I know is a friend of yours. All you guys, and it's not limited to you guys, but I think it was most striking with you guys, all talked about your faith. You, I don't remember if you said this on air or not, but you started out, like you said, Baptist, and you kind of read yourself into Lutheranism. Dr. Kuntz started out Anglican and kind of read himself into Lutheranism. Dr. Bombaro started Catholic. He kind of read himself into Lutheranism. And now the way that you're talking about the way you became a woodworker and restoring tools, the way you handle technology in your house, you've said a couple of times, I'm not being legalistic. What I would say is that you are being very intentional and you are living a life examined. And that's a phrase I've heard before. I don't know what the source of that phrase is. I'm sure it's some great mind somewhere talks about the life examined. But the last thing I would ask you to do is just make a case for the life examined. It's very clear whether you're doing it intentionally or not. That is the way you're living your life. Everything is up for examination. And you've used the word maximize a couple of times. You can't maximize everything, but
Sure.
you can maximize a lot of things, and that can be your attitude towards them. One of the trends that I notice the most in men and women is just a lack of awareness or a lack of intentional thought about the way that they're living, the things they're giving their time to, their money to, so forth. So I would ask you before we close here just to make the case for an examined life.
Sure. Yeah. Lots of great minds have said that. We could go back to Socrates, maybe even further, but he said the unexamined life is not worth living, right? And I think that is especially needed in our day, where it's so easy to just sort of go along with things, to ride with the tide, to be apathetic or passive, right? I think that's especially a temptation for men to be passive, right? What instead we want to do is exercise our personal agency, right? To engage in thinking carefully about our lives, and develop habits and practices that are actually virtuous and good, right? Again, not because these things justify us. Heck no, right? We all know. Well, I'll reiterate, right, in case we don't know, that that none of this is an attempt to please God or earn our salvation. It's because of the gospel of Jesus Christ that first off, that causes us to examine ourselves, right? We see our sinfulness, right? That's self-examination. The law does its work, convicts us of our sin, and we see the wonder of our Savior, Jesus Christ, who fulfilled the law perfectly, right? And that then is credited to us and given to us. But as we know, that also makes us new creatures, right? That declaration of righteousness, that imputation of Christ's righteousness, which is pure gift, also works within us sanctification as we're made more and more in the likeness and image of Christ. And as that's happening to us, that's going to cause us to examine ourselves, right? And of course, we want to be careful here, right? We don't want to go down sort of a pietistic trap. And I don't want to go back to my Baptist days of introspection and subjective feelings about whether I'm pleasing God or not. That's not what this is about. But it's simply a life of virtue, right? As one who is redeemed by Christ the crucified and is made a new creature, that leads to virtuous living. And we should be able to embrace that and enjoy that. Again, not in some legalistic man-made code fashion, but because it's better. It's beautiful. And what Christ has done for us and what he brings us into is much better than what the world offers. And so I think that's a good place to land here. I want to reiterate again, this is not about saying no. It's about saying yes to what is true, good, and beautiful. And all of that culminates in Christ, right? And that, I think, is another part I just want to connect here that we didn't really throughout the discussion, and that's the centrality of the incarnation in all of this stuff we've been talking about, right? That is the pattern and paradigm for how God interacts with the world, the incarnation of Christ. The Word became flesh. And if he himself takes on a body and redeems the body, perfects the body, glorifies the body, then we should use our bodies. And of course, he comes to us in very embodied ways, right? In word and sacrament. And through that union with him, we then are formed into a community, right? That the body of Christ then becomes this community constituted around the flesh and blood of Christ in the Eucharist. And then that sort of overflows from the Eucharistic table into our parish table, into our familial table, as we live as those redeemed by Christ. So.
Awesome. I love it. Thank you so much. I forgive me for this, but I just Well, don't forget. I'm going to couch this because I know that we often get uncomfortable when people praise us. So I do want to say I thank God every day that I get to do what I do, as a vicar and so forth, but also with platforms like this because I get exposed to men like you, and my network continues to grow. So, thank you for challenging me throughout the interview. I mean that genuinely. I'm not just saying that for the credibility on the podcast. I really do appreciate what you're saying. I appreciate the way that you are challenging both me, my listeners, and I imagine the people around you to be thinking this way. And it's an encouragement to me, like more than I can express. It's an encouragement to me to just see other Christians who are being mindful about the way they live their lives and being protective both of their own hearts and the hearts of the people around them. So, Josh, thank you for the work that you're doing at church and school. Thank you the way you are raising your daughters and running your household. And thank you also for taking the time to sit down with us and just share this, right? We're very, very thankful for all of that. We'll make sure that we have lots of links to Josh's work down in the show notes below. Josh, anything else you want to say before we kick it here?
No, I really appreciate what you're doing, Charlie. Thanks so much for your work. And, I just want to encourage people that, hey, we're really seeing the turning of the tide on a lot of these questions of technology, and Christians should be leading the way. We have the answers to these things. We have the true understanding of what it means to be a human. And of course, as I said, we also have the incarnation of Christ where he takes on human flesh. And those are our starting points. And that's deep down what people need and want, right? They want embodied community. They want the mystery and enchantment and the glory and the beauty of sacramental worship, and we have it. And so let's nail it here.
Yeah, that's something I've been growing more and more passionate about, and we're not going to open up this can of worms, but growing more and more passionate about the fact that there is no such thing as a Christian worldview. There's the correct and the incorrect. And if what we believe is true, if what Paul says is true, then if we're wrong, we should be pitied more than most. But if we're right, that's the only thing that matters, and we need to act like it. So awesome. Big thanks to our guest, Josh Pauling, for joining us today. If you want to be part of the Gird Up mission, you're in the right place. Hit follow or subscribe, leave a rating and review, and share this episode with someone who needs a community just like this one. If you'd like to support the work we do here at Gird Up, consider a cup of coffee donation. Go to www.girdupministries.com. Buy us a cup of coffee and help us flood the internet with confessional content. If you've got questions, topics, or guest ideas, send them my way through the link down in the show notes. Of course, we'll have a bunch of Josh's links down there as well. I love you guys. God bless you, and we'll talk to you next time.